Thank you, Dr. Karani. And I want to thank the Department of Medical Education for supporting us in going to this important meeting. So I'm going to talk about two things. I'm going to talk about an update from the National Residency Matching Program, which is always a highlight of the meeting. And there was some presentations by the MIZP task force from the AAMC talking about how to make some changes in the MIZP, and I'm going to go over those discussions. I do not have any disclosures. So all of my slides are from Mona Seiner, who's the CEO of the NRMP, and I've selected about 5 or 6 of them that I thought were most useful. The full presentation is actually on the NRMP website if people are interested. This is a graph of the number of residency positions in the green line on top. So those are the number of PGY1 positions that are open through the match. And that big sort of swath of blue that ends up having a little tinge of aqua here is the number of U.S. allopathic seniors. So that's U.S. seniors who matched. And this is the number of actual U.S. seniors, the black one. So not 100% of U.S. seniors match. I'll go over that in a minute. But the point that I want to make in this slide is 2. One is that there are more PGY1 slots available in the match than there are U.S. allopathic grads by a factor of 9,000, so it's quite a bit. The other is that we've probably heard from students and from other folks that the match seems to be getting more difficult, but this is not really borne out by this slide because you can see the number of U.S. grads has gone up gradually over the last several years because of the opening of new medical schools, and existing medical schools have expanded their class size. But also the number of PGY1 spots has gone up despite the GME cap through Medicare. And the reason it went up, one is that there's been just some programs have added their own positions through their own funding or alternate funding. And does anybody know what this jump is from? Why this jump happened? This was the all-in policy that happened. So it used to be that programs could decide to be part of the match or not part of the match. Some programs would select applicants outside of the match. But starting several years ago, the NRMP said that if your institution has one program that uses the match, all of the programs have to use the match or none of them do. So most of them opted in. So that's why there was this jump in residency spots here. But it's kind of interesting how these two lines have sort of paralleled each other.
That's actually not true, what you said.
What about the all-in?
A program is either all in or out, but not every program in the institution must follow the same rule.
So you're saying that within a program you can't have some slots in and some slots out, the whole program has to be. My understanding was the whole hospital, the whole institution has to be all in or all out.
They floated that, but it never happened.
So it's by program. Okay, thanks for clarifying that.
Green line, is that categorical or does it include prelim spots?
It includes prelim spots as well. So even though it's 9,000 more spots, a lot of those are prelim spots, which is a good point. This gives you a sense of all of the people in the match. So there were 35,000 applicants last year, and most of those were U.S. seniors. You can see here, and that's slowly gone up. There was a smaller number of prior U.S. grads. Those are folks who graduated and are applying for like a second residency. The blue is U.S. citizens who went to offshore schools. The light blue is international medicine graduates, and the fuchsia is DO students. So you can see the total number of folks has gone up. And this is the match rate by applicant type. So you can see here it's been pretty flat for U.S. seniors. The match rate has been between 92 and 94% going back almost 10 years. And you can see it's been slightly increasing for osteopathic grads. It's been relatively flat for the other ones. The red is prior U.S. grads, and they tend to have a low match rate for a couple reasons. One is that they've already done a residency. So if I did a residency in medicine, when I declare myself and I start that residency, the GME world looks at me as having 3 years of funding. And if I apply in another field, my 3 years have already been expended. So any of an institution would have to incur that cost if they wanted me as a resident. So they have a lower match rate for that reason. So there are more U.S. seniors because of the school expansion, like I talked about 2,000 over the last 10 years. And I do think, despite the fact that there has been a slight increase in PGY1 spots, It has made the match more competitive because that increase in the PGY1 spots has not always been the most competitive programs. So we have more U.S. seniors vying for the most competitive programs, and I think that's been borne out in our experience with our students. This is a busy slide. I won't go through it in great detail, but just to show you by specialty which ones have the highest and lowest match rates for U.S. seniors. And you can see they have two. The blue is 2011 and the light blue is 2015. So just to walk you through this, in 2011, 79% of students who tried to match in dermatology did. So that means 21% did not. And then last year was 75%. So the ones that are boxed tend to be the more competitive ones. I'm not exactly sure why they boxed these ones over here. One highlight is that OB became a much more competitive match last year, as Kathy can attest. And another interesting thing is plastic surgery back in 2011 only had 44% of students from U.S. schools match, and that went up to 84%. It's not a huge number of spots, but it's interesting that that went up so much.
Do we think it's positive or a negative indicator that some specialties have such a high match rate?
I think it just shows that they're more or less competitive.
That they're more
It just shows you how competitive these are compared to, say, family medicine or something like that.
I see.
Yeah. One is there's just a lot more spots in those fields. But it's also useful in terms of counseling our students about their prospects. This is another way of looking at the data. This is percent unmatched students who ranked just one specialty, and TS is thoracic surgery. So something like 33% of students who tried to match in thoracic surgery did not match in it, followed by dermatology, orthopedic surgery, neurosurgery, and otolaryngology. So you can see the surgical subspecialties in dermatology tend to be the most competitive, which we knew about. Do people know what SOAP is? The Supplementary Offer and Acceptance Program. So that if a student goes unmatched the Monday of match week, they can enter something called the SOAP, which allows them to go through a series of offers and acceptances with the idea of trying to find them a spot. So the match program works extremely well. So of all those spots, at the end of the match program, there's only 973 open spots that's left over, and roughly half of those are prelim. So about 500 are prelim, and 400 of those are surgery prelims, which are not always the most desirable positions. And what happened a couple years ago is there's actually now more unmatched seniors than there are spots in SOAP. So that creates a crisis that we don't have spaces for all these folks. And in fact, at the end of match week, after they've gone through all the iterations of SOAP, there's still about 600 unmatched US seniors, which is not great. This is my final slide from the NRMP. This compares students who matched to students who didn't match. So this top bar is students who matched in their preferred specialty. So they wanted to go into orthopedics, and that's what they matched into. So on average, across all the specialties, they applied to 37 programs. They interviewed at about 12, and they ranked about the same, a little bit lower in terms of what they ranked. This is students who matched, but they matched in a second choice. So sometimes we tell students who are trying to match in something very competitive, you might want to parallel plan and apply in something a little bit less competitive. And in there, the yield is a little bit less, but those who matched, they had about 24 programs they applied to, and they interviewed at 6.7, and they ranked 6.5. And just in comparison to folks who didn't match, students who didn't match in their chosen specialty, they applied to nearly 60 programs. They interviewed at 6.9, and they ranked more programs than they interviewed at, which is not a great strategy because you're not going to be ranked by a program that has not interviewed you. And students who didn't match to the primary or their secondary program, you can see the yield was much lower here. So they had much more applications, but a lower yield for their primary program. So just in the interest of time, I'm going to switch gears. Yeah.
Because they don't get the interviews of the programs they apply to. Is that,
Here, you mean?
yeah, is that the 58?
Yeah, they're not getting interviews in their choice. Yeah, it's a pretty low yield. It's only about 10%. So I'm going to switch gears and talk quickly about the MIZP. So everybody in the room know what the MIZP is? Okay, so I won't go through explaining what that is. it's it's sort of like a narrative transcript. It describes students' performance as compared to peers over the first 3 years of med school and sometimes into the fourth. And its purpose is really evaluative and not as a predictor of future success or as a letter of recommendation the way you would write a letter for somebody who you worked with. The last time the AAMC offered any kind of guidelines around it was 2002. It's an important document when you survey program directors. It's the third most important thing that program directors use for selecting applicants for interviewing, and it's eighth for ranking. So things like how the interview went and stuff like that become more important for ranking, but it's still fairly important. It's incredibly variable, though. So there was just a study in academic medicine from a few weeks ago where researchers at Stanford looked at most of the MIZPs in the country and compared them to each other, and they found that about 51% of the MIZPs had incomplete information. Only 51% had complete information about how clerkship grades were distributed and how the keyword was derived. The keyword means that usually the last sentence of the MIZP is something like, "This student is an excellent candidate," or "This student is an outstanding candidate." And different schools use different keywords, and they use different criteria for coming up with the keywords, and it's not always very clear how they come up with those keywords. So only 51% of the MIZPs were clear in these areas. So they're highly variable documents, and they're long. So there was some discussions about the MIZP at the AAMC. There were a couple of different meetings, and one was a presentation by the MIZP task force. And a lot of us went there thinking that we would learn about their new guidelines, and we're looking forward to that because the other ones are quite dated at this point. And it was clear that they weren't ready to issue guidelines yet, and they were using the AAMC meeting as kind of a data gathering type of situation. So there were some clear things, though. One is that the length is just too unwieldy for screening, and so there has been some suggestion about having some sort of executive summary at the front of the MIZP. As I mentioned from the study I just quoted, there's high variability in how MIZPs are written and their metrics determined. What they said is that whatever their guidelines are going to be, it's going to be emphasis on more explicit comparative data, presentative graphs. So what they would want is not just in the body of the MIZP, there's a narrative of how the student did in each clerkship. What people are going to probably look for is a graph within the body of the MIZP describing the distribution of grades in the clerkship, and perhaps even comparative performance by ECG competency. But they did not offer any explicit recommendations at present and did not give a timeline for doing so. So conclusions. The match rate is consistently high among U.S. seniors, but the match has grown more competitive. Options for our unmatched students are unfortunately limited, which is why it's so important to do preemptive counseling. There's high variability in MIZPs across schools. And unfortunately, there's no specific recs for the MIZP yet, but it looks like they're going to go the way of presenting more comparative data and using more graphs. And that is my presentation. Questions? Yeah.
If they go with the ACGV competencies, how difficult will it be for you all to change the way you assess students? I mean, how much would you have to change our competencies and the evaluation process to line it up so you could produce the document?
Right, I think that's exactly what would have to happen. My sense is it will not happen that way because the AAMC has their own vested interest in their competencies.
Yeah.
And they also have a vested interest in dealing with their membership, which comprises the 151 LCME accredited medical schools. There will be a tremendous uproar. Because what you're graduating as a student who's ready for supervised practice. And so that definition varies across schools. So I think we would have a real uphill battle pushing that through.
Yeah.
If it happens, we'll all have to.
Program directors would be happy though.
I'm sure.
Yeah, which is, the key is finding enough flexibility so that the schools can represent what they feel is important, but having enough currency so that a program director can read different MIZPs from different schools and not have to, read the whole 15 pages of the MIZP to really understand what it's all about. Most people just go to the last sentence. That's true.
You want to share a little bit about some of the stuff we're thinking about?
Sure. So in parallel with this, we've also started to look at our MIZP processes and thought about ways to improve it, and along the criticisms that are here, using more comparative data and making it more readable. So some ideas we've had is breaking, we use a metric that combines academics, leadership and community service, humanism, and research. And we've thought about breaking that out and making it more explicit, so program directors can see how students rank in each one of those domains, as opposed to sort of like a summative domain, which, again, we explain what that means, but unless somebody really does some digging in the appendices of our MIZP, they may not understand it. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Karani.
I wanted to speak about the student surveys, and some of us are very aware that the AAMC does a series of surveys of students throughout their time in medical school, and actually starting before they arrive. And I thought this would be helpful for us to think about, because the questions in there have a lot to do with how we are with students, and there's a lot of areas of high impact for us as faculty and educators and collaborators with students for us to think about this, and looking at it from the assessment perspective. What are they looking to ask students, and therefore what does that reflect about us, and what could we do about that? I do not have any conflicts. So for those of us who, just to give you a brief orientation of what the surveys are, the AAMC administers 4 surveys. The first is the post-MCAT survey, and that is administered to all takers of the MCAT 3 weeks after they have sat for the examination. A matriculation questionnaire, which is the summer prior to entry into medical school. A year 2 survey, which is administered in the fall of the second year of medical school. And finally, the graduation survey, which is the one we've talked a lot about, and that is in the spring of the graduation year. All these surveys are anonymous and voluntary. There was a point in the AAMC history where the graduation survey was required of all students nationally. And what has been found is that because they are a vulnerable population, the IRBs at institutions across the country said that that cannot be mandated. And so schools across the country do a variety of things to promote participation, from raffles to gifts to giveaways, et cetera, because you can imagine that if the response rate is not good, the inferences you make from it are certainly therefore less important or valuable. How did the AAMC share data from these? So one is that each school gets their individual school data, aggregated and anonymously. They also provide you with national data from all responders. So for any number you see, if their mean score for something is 3.4, you will also see what the national mean was for that particular question. The AAMC is not able to provide data by region, by type of school, by subset, or by any other way you want to slice and dice the sort of grouping of schools. It is literally all schools reporting and your data. And that's the way they've done it for years. So briefly about the constructs, like what do these surveys measure? And what's interesting to think about is how the AAMC and its research team are thinking about longitudinal data, right? Like what are things that you can measure over time that then you can show changes over time and therefore reflect upon and think about what sort of results in those changes. So at the bottom of the slide, you can see that specialty choice and career preference are measured across all 4 surveys, the post-MCAT, the matriculation, the year 2, and the graduation survey. Indebtedness is a very, very big area in medical education today and has been, and the concept of the fact that there's hugely rising indebtedness among medical students, which is affecting career choice, is one of the reasons they measure indebtedness coming into medical school, essentially college and your prior training, and then at the end of medical school, where you are in terms of indebtedness. In the first 2 surveys, they also measure what were the influences that led to your decision to pursue a career in medicine, and how prepared do you feel? Maybe from college courses, from previous work experiences, how prepared do you feel entering, and what is that perspective when you're going into school? And then some questions about prior work, because there are more and more people going to medical school, taking time off after college, and volunteerism, sort of the role that plays in medical education being something the AAMC is also very interested in. And then the minute they sort of matriculate till they graduate, there has been an increased emphasis on wellness and quality of life, and I will show you the questions in those so that we can actually think about them. 2 big areas of interest that relate more to the workforce issues and that is tolerance of ambiguity and empathy. There is a lot of literature that physicians are burning out in practice, that over 60% of physicians surveyed in most surveys say they would not choose this as a career again and do not recommend it. And so there's a lot of focus on what's happening in the profession that might lead to this, in some ways, disastrous outcome during practice. And then in the second year and going forward, perceptions of the learning environment, what negative behaviors are going on in terms of mistreatment, the curriculum, and then finally, sort of at the end, thinking about when a student is graduating, what is their assessment of the competencies they've acquired before they leave for residency. So these are the constructs that are. So the year 2 survey is the newest survey. I just wanted to give you a little bit of a framework because many of us in the room who took the graduation survey when we were medical students probably do not remember this because it's new. So in 2013, the survey was piloted for the first time. And in 2014, they administered it to schools and students across the country, but they did not provide individual school data. They just took whoever responded from across the nation and just sort of put it together and sent it back to schools saying this was this pilot year. We're just giving you a sense of how it was, people responded, and if they needed to do any tweaks to the questions, that was going to happen in that intervening year. And in 2015 was the second annual survey, meaning the first administration where we will get individual school data. And those school data are due to come back in February to us as a school. So we will soon have our Y2 survey data. All the surveys do follow demographics, how students self-identify. And the year 2 survey focuses a lot on the satisfaction thus far till the fall of second year, so about a year and a quarter essentially, of their satisfaction with medical education. There is a growing interest in the need to learn and train with interprofessional students, not interprofessional faculty, advanced trainees, or practitioners, interprofessional students, and that's an area of great interest for us as a medical school as we think about how to partner with and how to build on that, because that is an area of great opportunity for us. They asked students about their attendance at in-person and virtual classes. Those of us who teach our students know very well that sometimes you can be lecturing to a class of one person. But that is a national trend, and there are colleges that are running their entire curricula in ways that have virtual attendance. And so they just want to figure out where the trends are in terms of attendance as opposed to watching things at home. And then they really drill down very deeply into the average number of hours per day that students spend doing various activities: sleep, exercise, recreation, paid work, actual educational activities. I mean, they drill down very, very deep into what you're doing and how you spend your actual day, I think because of this great interest in the pressure that school can place on students and what else changes over time when you have lots of pressures in your academic life. Mistreatment that we've talked a lot about, the concept of thinking about how students are mistreated in the educational environment in such a way that it impacts their learning, be it in the form of being publicly humiliated and all the way down to having things said to you based on your race and ethnicity, your sexual orientation, your gender preference or identity. Quality of life, and then some new areas of focus that I want to sort of talk about today. So the perceptions of the learning environment is the first area of focus. It shows up in the year 2 and the graduation questionnaire. Professionalism modeled by us as faculty. Empathy and tolerance for ambiguity, which starts even at matriculation because they're thinking about how you come in with those areas and what happens. And then well-being and burnout, which starts from the beginning because there's more evidence that the process to get into medical school being so competitive is that when students come into medical school, they are incredibly burned out, incredibly stressed. And then the first year of medical school is often the one where they're looking to kind of decompress because they know they have to ramp up by year 3 for the residency application process. So this is the reason for doing it at matriculation. So for each one, I've broken down the actual questions. For the learning environment, there are 3 domains that they're assessing: the emotional climate, the student-faculty interaction, and the student-student interaction. And the 3 items for emotional climate are: the educational environment makes students value themselves, the educational experience makes students feel a sense of achievement, and finally, the experience makes students confident of their academic abilities. And I think each one of these can give us room for thought and thinking about how might one create a learning environment that actually supports these. In terms of student-faculty interaction, it's 4 items that students complete. Faculty are reserved and distant with students. Faculty are helpful to students seeking advice not directly related to academic matters. Faculty and administrators give personal help to students having academic difficulties. And finally, when giving criticism or answering a question, faculty are genuinely interested in helping the student. So I mean, we're all sitting here with bated breath waiting for our data, but you can see how these questions really touch upon things that are sort of go beyond what we might traditionally consider our typical role. Did I get everything up there on time? Did I show up there? Did I, direct them to the right person? It's really about sort of going beyond, if you will, above and beyond. In terms of student-student interaction, there are 4 items. Students spend time assisting each other. Students in the school get to know each other well. Students in the school are distant with each other. And finally, students gather in informal activities. So so they're trying to really make the learning environment about us as faculty, their interactions, and then the emotional climate that they perceive in the learning space. The second area of growth is professionalism modeled by us as faculty. And as I mentioned in this, the questions are not identical when they're assessed in the second year and then the graduation, because their assumption is that you're interacting with many more clinical faculty at the time of the graduation survey, as opposed to year 2, where you might be interacting more with classroom faculty. So here's how they want to assess our students' perceptions of our professionalism. Please rate how often the following behaviors and attitudes are demonstrated by your medical school's faculty: respecting patient confidentiality, using professional language and avoiding derogatory language, being respectful of other specialties. And this is a very big area, because one of the big reasons that students choose a field is role modeling. And if we role model disrespectful behaviors and attitudes toward other specialties, that can be a turnoff to the student to even come to our specialty. Being respectful of other health professions, and taking time and effort to explain information to patients. And I'll just wait for our data. Okay, third area is empathy and tolerance for ambiguity, and that's often an area where we haven't looked at the scales before, so I thought they were pretty helpful. There are 2 scales: the interpersonal reactivity index, and then the tolerance for ambiguity scale. I often have tender, concerned feelings for people less fortunate than me. Sometimes I don't feel very sorry for people when they're having problems. When I see someone being taken advantage of, I feel kind of protective toward them. Other people's misfortunes do not usually disturb me a great deal. I sometimes find it difficult to see things from the other guy's point of view. In emergency situations, I feel apprehensive and ill at ease. I try to look at everyone's side of a disagreement before I make a decision. And I sometimes try to understand my friends by imagining how things look from their perspective. There was some back and forth when the AAMC was using this scale in the pilot about the social desirability of some of these questions. But what they have found is that over large-scale numbers of people and with the number of items that they have, there actually is quite a significant distribution in this category. What about tolerance for ambiguity? Here are the questions. It really disturbs me when I'm unable to follow another person's train of thought. If I'm uncertain about the responsibilities involved in a particular task, I get very anxious. I am often uncomfortable with people unless I feel I can understand their behavior. Before any important task, I must know how long it will take. I don't like to work on a problem unless there's a possibility of getting a clear-cut and unambiguous answer. And finally, a good task is one in which what is to be done and how it is to be done are always clear. So one of the areas, the reason for tolerance for ambiguity is such a great interest to educators is this concept that with healthcare changing at the speed it is, and the expectations of physicians in practice changing so rapidly, there's great concern that those who are low on the scale of tolerance for ambiguity are going to have a harder time dealing with the challenges in practice and may actually be much more higher likely to develop burnout and have questions of wellness as they progress through their careers. So the final area of the new area of focus is well-being and burnout itself. There are tons of studies that use Maslach's burnout inventory. We've seen the huge amount of literature coming out of Mayo. And the AAMC chose not to use that inventory. They chose to use the Oldenburg burnout inventory with 2 dimensions in particular that they felt medical students were at risk for, and that is disengagement and exhaustion. And there are 16 items between those two domains that students fill out that they will be monitoring. So what are the take-home points from these surveys? One is that I think each item gives us a chance to really reflect and look upon how we as a school promote and how our own behavior can really impact students. But it provides us with longitudinal data that we're going to be able to look at. We've had for many, many years graduation survey data, but now we will have data that start even in the second year of medical school to help us. And we as faculty and educators have a real major and active role to play in this. And I don't know how yet to operationalize it, but I know we'll all have ideas, and so we want to welcome you to come share those with us. As we build new programming for students and new opportunities, we have spent some time thinking about wellness and being optimistic for success and trying to deal with some of the difficulties in training. And together with Jillian and Jillian's group of student wellness, and Craig, we spent a lot of time thinking about how to build some of those sort of structural programs in place. But I think we have a long way to go. And I think we have a role with each other as faculty to figure out how we actually behave and exemplify the behaviors we expect of our students, such that that reflection is indeed what they see when they sort of talk, when they present these data back to us. And that every day our professionalism is being assessed by students, even though we think sometimes they're not. I think they are, and they're picking up things. It's not even what we say, it's much more what we do. And then finally, this continuum of this continued effort to really think about well-being and burnout. It is incredibly high in residency programs. It is incredibly high when applying for the residency application process. And I think that as a sort of call for us all is going to be this issue of how do we really kind of make meaningful changes in how students feel about their wellness and well-being if they are to become really productive members of our workforce. I will take some questions. Professor.
The matriculation survey and the after MCAT. So the after MCAT, they don't know where they're going to med school. So who gets that data? Just the
AAMC gets that data.
Learn and think. Okay.
Right, and then they work with the MCAT.
Right.
Right.
The matriculation one
Comes to each school. It comes to each school. So each school, there's a AAMC. There's a person assigned to receive those data, and then those data come to the school. I would say that some of the matriculation data, so much of it is demographic, and now there's these little areas that they've got that might be worth looking at. The Y2 is going to give us the bulk of data to kind of chew on and then move forward. Holly.
How long do these surveys take?
It's interesting. The graduation survey can take up to an hour and 15 minutes. The Y2 survey, they said, right, Jillian, they said 15 minutes, but it was long. It was quite a long survey, especially items that are very personal and that deal with sort of feelings and emotions. It certainly looked longer than that. Scott.
Sorry, it's probably on the slide you showed with the bars, but the matriculation survey, does it include questions about,
Right,
the,
that's my question. Right.
yeah, the tolerance for ambiguity.
Right, that's what I just said to them.
So those are intended to eventually be there.
Okay.
And when I put on the slide where it showed Y2 and graduation,
The graphic data and stuff like that, but from that.
those are, I think what happened is that because those questions are really getting their sort of foundation in the Y2, they wanted really good data from those, and then I believe that they're going to track that back.
Okay, because it would be interesting to do.
Absolutely.
Did you do a post-bac? Did you do an early assurance
Right. And might that have some relation?
here and all of that?
Totally.
Do we have copies of these?
No, these data are sent to the school, and specific portions are.
Questions that just that-
Oh yeah, you can look them up.
We can
Yes,
look them up.
yes. In fact, if you look up if you just type in the survey, you will pull up the questions.
I guess perhaps, this burnout thing is a very strange concept to me.
Which one, Scott? I'm sorry.
The whole concept of burnout is not something I was talked about at all, back in my day. And you only get aggregate data. But it might be interesting to say, you just took this test, and if you answered these questions in the following way, it may indicate that you're at risk for burnout, and then say, and maybe you can come forward and we can talk about how we could, because there's no other way to identify people except
No, they.
forward and say, listen, I answered these questions in a way that probably indicates I'm very high risk, so therefore can you help me before I burn out?
Well, some of the literature that came out of Mayo looked at what are the sort of reasons for burnout rates that they were seeing in students. And some of them are very structural. So for example, that's one of the reasons many schools have gone to pass-fail in year 1 and 2, because actually grading in year 1 and 2 was found to be very strongly correlated with burnout. There was faculty who were not assigned to be mentors and advisors was found to actually have a role. So that's another reason why so many schools have built very robust programs. And some of it they're finding now relates to how someone, relates to histories of depression, relates to how someone did in college, there's a ton of things. And so some of it is trying to identify, but also I think schools are taking more now the approach of saying, how do you present a variety of resources that students can avail of all the time, right? So that it normalizes the fact that I can reach out for help, I can reach out for test-taking strategies, I can, et cetera. So absolutely, I think some of it is proactive as opposed to sort of reactive.
Thanks, Dr. Karani, for inviting me to share some of my thoughts. So I have nothing to disclose other than I have burnout. And I didn't go to medical school, so. The 2 sessions I'm going to talk about allow you to kind of get a sense of the national landscape on the key indicators of institutional success and have a little bit of understanding around what's happening on the Supreme Court level as it relates to enhancing diversity in institutions of higher ed. Love that. Thank you, Maggie. Love that light bulb. So the first session I want to talk about talked about the key indicators of success. It included institutions, the Medical University of South Carolina, University of Utah Health Sciences Center, Brody School of Medicine at East Carolina, and Georgia Tech University from their policy and public policy departments. The areas that I'm going to focus on were education, success in education, and success in the clinical environment. And the 2 institutions I'm going to talk about who shared their information are the Medical University of South Carolina and the University of Utah. So the initial discussion had to do with the kind of standard indicators of success in academic medicine. So how do we assess ourselves and each other, and how do we know when we have achieved success? So most of those in all of our institutions have focused on 5 key domains: knowledge, right? So shelf and board exams, match rates, et cetera; behavior, professionalism, learning environment, climate; the graduation questionnaire; attitudes, surveys, as Dr. Karani had spoke about; skills, whether or not our students have the skills that we expect. We test them in OSCEs and SP activities; simulation, procedure logs, and other things like board certification, maintenance of certification, continuation rates in the field and profession, and residency director surveys. So that's kind of the industry standard on how institutions in academic medicine assess ourselves and look at ourselves in comparison to each other. And what I thought was really interesting that the folks at the Medical University of South Carolina did was they kind of decided to shift that paradigm. They said, we want to focus on different areas. We want to measure our success through different lenses and hopefully jumpstart a conversation nationally that would allow other people to think about the success in these same parameters. So their new paradigm domains included advanced knowledge, embracing diversity, fostering innovation, and building healthy community partnerships, which I thought was quite novel. So in their new system, advancing knowledge, that includes creating a scholarly year, right? Scholarly concentrations, enhancing educational technology and innovation. In their embracing diversity domain, they speak about bias training for all of their faculty, staff, and students, health equity and social justice curricula at their institutions, and creating a repository for all of these activities so that they can document how much of this type of work is being done, who's doing it, and where it's being done. And fostering innovation, which included creating interprofessional teams, increasing admissions programs like our FlexMed program, for instance, and the accelerated programs for medical schools, so those institutions that are allowing folks to graduate within 3 years. and creating healthcare delivery curriculum so that students graduate understanding the healthcare environment, understanding the dynamic environment that it has created. Finally, building healthy communities, which I thought was quite interesting. What they do is they have created a resource library for patients. They've created a cultural competence curriculum. They train students as patient navigators, and they train students to assess and create projects to address the needs of the community, and encourage students to collaborate with community partners in some community-based participatory research experiences. So what struck me about this is that we do all of this. Every one of these domains, we have something that not only do we demonstrate our success in, but we've created novel approaches to doing that. And so the hope is that we collectively can, take our collective energy and really think about how to shift the landscape and to identify what does success look like in the educational environment, and what do we want our students to graduate with? What is the mindset we want them to have as it relates to their own success and success in the workforce? The next institution that I felt was really, really ahead of the curve on this is the University of Utah School of Medicine. And their presentation spoke about the intersection of the clinical and education mission, and how we've been really driven as an academic medicine workforce by volume. The word volume is really how we've really assessed clinical success in almost every realm, right? Since the advent of managed care, value has been correlated with volume. 10-hour days, assembly line, patient care processes, discharge patient data in silos, not connected to any other types of data, not connected to what happens with the patient afterwards. Also, RVUs. Those have been the main indicators, right? So we take the RVU system and we've put it into our T-dollar system. Their shift was based in the patient, the education of the student and the patient and the faculty, and shifting value to values, which I loved. When she said that, I was struck, and I think at that point, I think I had a girl crush and an institution crush on the University of Utah. So their values-driven environments is their new tagline. So values-driven outcomes for value-driven organization, which I love. So their new paradigm is rooted in value equals quality plus service over dollars, which I thought was brilliant. I mean, just to have it look like that, I thought really changes the way you think about what is value, what does it mean, and what does it mean to me. And I thought that was really quite innovative. They also had the creation of scorecards for service, right? So in addition to changing the way they think about what it means to be successful in their environment, now they're going to say, we're going to ask patients if you really are. They have created a process of evaluation for that. So the scorecard included questions like the friendliness of your provider. Did they give you an explanation of your care? Did your physician or caregiver show concern for you? These things that are not quantifiable at all and are intangible and solely based on the patient's feeling or experience, not at all what you've done or the markers that you have achieved, really changes a lot of how the patients feel when they leave, and about how you as the provider then engages with that patient, and how the students see that role modeling. And I thought that was wonderful. They also make it public to the world. So they have it on their intranet. They have it on every landing page for every patient in Epic. So their My Chart landing page includes all of the data for the provider of that patient, right? So at first, she said folks were really upset because they felt like it was more shaming than really engaging people in a new way of thinking. But what happens, of course, is the gunners come out, right? The people that just want to be the best about it, and so they're going to do their best. And then what also happened is that folks really wanted their patients to like them. I mean, and I'm sure folks in the room can attest to that, right? It's one thing to want to do good work, but it's a whole other thing to want to be liked by your patients. I don't think anybody wants not to be liked by their patients. And so those things, those kind of inherent good, that inherent good in all of us, they're taking and harnessing to identify success, which I thought was really great. The other part that they felt that had to do with this new equation, this quality plus service over dollars, had to do with understanding how much it really costs. Like, really, when we peel away everything, what does it cost for every encounter and every experience? What they did was they looked at the cost of every patient experience. So a patient presents in the ED, right? Then they go to the surgery, then they go to SICU, then they go to the step-down unit, then they go to the floor. And they deconstructed the cost for every step of that. Supplies, labor, drugs, formulary services, imaging, all of that. And they were able to come up with a very clear understanding of what the cost of every patient encounter and every patient experience really was. And then they took that and they modeled every way a patient would get care, right? And then they created this new database, this new system of analytics where they throw all of this data in, they understand what it means and how much it costs, and then they create a scorecard, right, which has the data, the cost, and the service all together and aggregated, and share that. So that scorecard, every provider has a scorecard in their system. Every department has a dashboard for every provider in their system, and the students learn from all of that. The students follow this trail and engage in every step of this way. So when the students graduate, they have kind of taken on this way of thinking. They understand the detail and data behind it. So they're ready to enter the workforce as already informed of this process and this mindset. And they do research on it. Students are assigned a project that looks at one data set, and they are required to present this data at some point over the course of their 4-year curriculum. So they are embracing it top down, vertically, horizontally, and really create an environment that allows for the students to graduate with a completely different mindset. The next session that I attended was a little less heartwarming and a little more disturbing. So it's about where we are in a national climate as it relates to the law and diversity in medical education and in higher education. So currently, I don't know if many of you know, there is a case pending before the Supreme Court as it relates to admissions in institutions of higher ed. It's a part deux to a case that was heard several years ago, the Fisher case. So just to give you a quick review of how these things have presented in front of the Supreme Court over the course of history. So we know Brown versus the Board of Education. The Brown courts required that institutions eliminate discrimination. Back case in 1978, you stated that you cannot use race in admissions. However, you can identify markers to obtain the benefits of diversity. So in other words, having markers that are race-like. The Grutter-Gratz decision affirmed the obtaining of educational benefits of diversity is a compelling interest for institutions of higher ed. So we think that it is important to your mission. If you think it's important to your mission, we think it's important to your mission for you to have diversity in your environment. And then Fisher 1 was really challenging Grutter-Gratz, saying, we feel that you cannot use race in any way. We feel it's discriminatory if you use race in any way. Abigail Fisher was the student at the University of Texas who presented this case all the way to the Supreme Court. And this is where it kind of gets interesting if you understand how SCOTUS works, right? So Kennedy wrote the dissent for Fisher 1. And in his dissent, many law scholars felt very strongly that he was setting something up. He was setting an environment and a landscape for people to challenge this decision. That he clearly felt, based on his dissent, that the environment should be changed. And that sparking kind of a discussion and really an undercurrent in communities that feel the same way as he described in his dissent. And so ultimately what happened was Abigail came back. So now we have Fisher 2, which is on the case. Fisher 2, which hopefully will be heard this summer. And basically, we're waiting to hear what the details of that are. The major issues of that case are: how has diversity at the University of Texas provided educational benefits? So now challenging an institution to document the benefits of their diversity. How did you do that? And why is that beneficial to you as an institution? Can you only obtain that benefit using race as a marker for admissions? And has UT, University of Texas, sufficiently used other markers to prove that race is the right marker to choose? So, you know, it's pretty scary these days. What you should know is that the AAMC, along with 32 other organizations comprised of folks like us in every sector of healthcare and students, wrote a brief and submitted it to the Supreme Court, outlining 4 key areas. Medical school obligation to extend, our medical school obligations extend to the society at large, including the obligation to redress healthcare disparities. Medical students must be educated in environments that reflect the diversity of the society that they serve, which implicates the holistic evaluation of medical school applicants. Preventing medical educators from considering the diversity of applicants would impoverish the educational experience for future doctors and diminish their ability to render with understanding their vital service to humanity, and that there is no substitute for consideration of race or ethnicity. There's no race-like, there's no such thing as race-like. So hopefully we'll have a positive outcome in this. But in the meantime, you know, Valerie's working very hard to make sure that we have a holistic process. We make sure that we have, you know, working with folks in CMCA to make sure that our diversity statement holds true to how we live and how we breathe and what we do. And so all of those things are now really important to be required for us to stay diligent in hopes that we can at least support that. No questions. Dr. Thomas is next.
So I can get through some of this. So I had a different bent on all this, and please feel free to leave if you need to. A different bent on this was that I have no conflicts. And what I really have been thinking about in my role in the department and in CME is around where we need to go in medical education. And sort of thinking a little bit about with program directors and the fellowship directors developing curricular and assessment going forward with the incredibly rapid change that's happening. And really thinking that I have no clue about what that means and how everyone is sitting around and still developing goals and objectives, and I want to watch you on the floor. And I have a funny feeling that in 2025 that we are going to be far from there. And so I got hooked on this, and AAMC had a few presentations around medical education 2025. And so that's what I went to, and have a couple, went to a few sessions. And so hopefully we'll get to reflect a little bit on that for a second, really what the external forces that are coming in. And ultimately, which I was going to suggest we could even change this into a one whole grand round, is around to think about for as a school where we need to go. And this started a little bit just to sort of give you some background, and my reading a little bit was this guy at Google is really talking about this combinatorial innovation, which is really looking at combining and recombining to create new interventions, which is how Google looks at the way that they approach their scholarship there. And then what are linear factors? So the trends, you'll see this gets into a little bit of what Rena had said earlier, right? So what are trends, right? We all know what the trends that are coming, right? The age demographics is a trend. But what are the external forces? And so the AAMC hired a company that's been around about 40 years that looked at what external future forces are going to impact organizations as a whole. And in general, they've done it for things like cars and manufacturers. And the AAMC was really forward thinking and did it for us. And I won't go this in incredible detail, but these are the trends. You all know this. You can scan that up there, right? So demographically, the age is increasing. What does that mean for us? Physician population is definitely decreasing, right? Large percentages of us are retiring now, right? The youth bulge is developing as a result, and then the incredible need for cultural competent care, which I think we all have seen. 50% of people with chronic illness in 2020, mental health illness conditions, and this violence, injuries, and infectious disease deals more with the globalness of our world at the moment, so how they are going to affect us. The economy, and I bring your attention to the part, the increased resources for all in finances, time, and knowledge, and that especially extends to the patient, right? The amount of that's needed for patient right now. Educationally, and this is where I think we have to struggle with, is really there's a decrease around, and Rena mentioned this, the centrality of educational process going on, especially as it relates to the classroom, and the need for really knowing the social determinants of health as it relates to genetic, social, and environmental factors. Technology is now generating big data, and big data is about to become abundant data, right? We're all overwhelmed at the moment with this concept of big data, but Minerva is dealing with abundant data in the basement of the institution, right? And then the other technologies, and especially this fitness and biological sensing and tracking mechanisms that people have on their bodies now. But what I have found fascinating is this nonlinear factors and external forces. And these are the 5 that this company has said is going to affect us. And I think that you will all be fascinated and challenged by it. So this on-demand learning, it's already here, right? On-demand learning is here. So it's going to transform educational institutions from hierarchical organizations to content curators, guiding students to the right learning opportunities. Right? This generation expects everything at a click, and this generation is far from my 7-year-old's generation that knows how to use an iPad more than me, right? So just throwing that out there. So on-demand learning has to be available anytime, any place, right? Face-to-face classroom is not going to exist, I put forward to you, in most instances. And there it is, there's the future, right? So this woman, she's burnt out. She's smirking, right? So wait, so I'm going to tell you. So
She's very good with ambiguity.
she is very good. Well, that's because she's looking at a procedure that Dr. Lightman has taught in the OR for many, many years. But she's learning it on her 50-minute ride home on the bus. She's practicing her simulation in there. And so for those of you who don't know, right, Google has IM Cardboard out. And I bought it last week, which was wonderful for the snowstorm. Because I didn't really realize it was going on. And if you have, I meant to bring it and I totally forgot because I'm going precepting. It came free with the Times. What? It came free with the Times on Sunday Times back in November, right? Well, Valerie, open it up, Valerie, and download these things. I today was looking at them and was dizzy at them. They're so realistic. And they're so far from where we're going to be in a few years. A highly, incredibly fascinating concept to think about, right? And probably what needs to happen, right? That's the next step up to be, before you start doing simulation, you're going to start to be learning it and being, if you look in those goggles, you could look up and you look at the sky, you look down, you look around. It's not one-dimensional. You look, it's incredible. And so how are we going to adapt to these changing needs, right? How are we as a school going to adapt to these changing needs? This is incredible stuff. You're all going to be working in 2025, right? So how will we design and our instructional methods change, right? Many of us have learned this kind of stuff, but how to do instructional methods, it may be different. And we have to be challenged to learn what that means. So what are flipped clinics? We've all learned a flipped classroom. This is the new concept that's coming forward, that's already present. Right? It's the patient, the empowered patient that's coming in with their actual data, right? The actual data of what's going on. This is basic. You know, they're always talking, what are they? Contact lenses now monitor your blood glucose, right? So think of where we are going. So the visit, what person will come in with all their data? You're not going to get it that day and forget to call them in a few days, right? The visit's going to be problem solving and collaboration, right? And this is going to be your screen, right? Nest can already do the environment, right? So as that's connected and you're doing telemedicine, which there's a pilot going on now in primary care here, this is what they do in a much more basic sense. But think when you can get all of those details, right? What does that mean for us in terms of what the trainees have to learn in terms of digital profiles and data literacy, right? We don't teach that in med school, right? We don't teach that. We don't even discuss that yet. So how will we adapt to this flipped clinic model, right? And anyone that's a preceptor or sees patients realizes this could be very challenging. Network discovery. So this is going to disrupt our traditional scientific discovery and move out of the heads of select experts onto networks, right? And this is probably the one that I'm most disappointed about not being able to show because it's 2 minutes long. If you get a chance to go into this Emerald Cloud Lab, right, Google it, it comes up right away. It is a 2-minute video to show how they do basic science research from across the country in a laboratory. Okay.
Send the PowerPoints around.
Yeah, we can send the PowerPoints around, do whatever. Yeah, just absolutely fascinating because everything is going to now be on open data, crowdsourcing, and citizen science, and not the individual scientist sitting in a classroom. So, but how will academic health centers reshape their culture, right? How will we think about these values and practices of openness and reciprocity where 30 people can be on a project, and what does that mean for promotion? How do academic medical centers change the way that they think first author, mentor author? This does not even allow that to be in existence in a promotions category for us. High resolution health. It's really talking about the new tools to see and study human health, right, on its multiple scales using big data, right? So it allows the use of biological health to link to the larger social and environmental patterns, right? So what does this do for our population health? If you get a chance, Google $1 million blocks. So Columbia University and this mapping center, it has a specific name, mapped 2 million incarcerated people. And what they found that in a few streets in every major city was the majority of people who were in prison and spending $1 million a year on them. Incredible use of big data, right? That we can't even get a concept around, and we're no way near being able to bring that into our health picture. So how will this change our approach, obviously, to population management and chronic disease, and then experimentation into prevention strategies when you can look at that level of detail and be able to see where something is concentrated. It's fascinating stuff. And then rapid prototyping cycles. I'll throw out, this is really around the PDSA cycle, really rapid PDSA cycles, quality improvement stuff. And this is going to become the norm as we go forward according to this trend cycle, right? This was a much more, I thought, vague than the other ones, but this idea of continuous systems improvement. And how will academic centers do this and then transform and learn these rapid, we're right now struggling how to get basic QI, PA for, you study 10 charts, right? QI, patient safety for 10 charts. This is talking big data, right? So because students will be able to do that. If you look at that lab, right, students are doing this from here, and our students, you've all seen with stuff they've done in EHOP and stuff like that, producing just after this moment on their side time while still doing incredibly well in school. So now think about our students who are going to be sitting at their computer here, and they're going to be organizing an experiment in California. That's amazing stuff. So these are sort of the future trends that this company is saying, and I think most of us, I hope, convinced at least to think a little bit more that this stuff is real. It's not real in 2017's curriculum, but I have a funny feeling in 2015 we're going to be a long way off from where we are. So
2025.
2025, yes. So that's,
Let me know how it goes.
yeah, we are going to report back to you. So thanks, everybody. Take it easy.